Good Sunday evening, everyone. It's Andrea here, and I just wanted to pop on to talk about something that has been bothering me, and we've been talking about it quite a bit. And it's what is DEI? I think many people who've worked in and around DEI assume that most people know what DEI is, or will take the time to actually figure it out. But there's so much discussion about it, and I've heard so much incorrect information from all over the place that I felt like I needed to pop on here and say something. Plus, this is my first YouTube live stream, so why not? What is DEI? It stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a framework used in workplaces, organizations, communities to create fair and inclusive environments. Diversity, it's the presence of differences within a group. That could be race, ethnicity, gender, age, sexual orientation, disability status, socioeconomic background, and many, many other things. We in the national discourse now, we focus a lot on race as an element of diversity, some as gender, and as we've heard in a recent press conference held by the president, even intellectual ability as a dimension of diversity, which it is. So equity is ensuring fair treatment, access, and opportunities for all individuals by addressing systemic barriers and disparities. So equity is essentially fairness. That is part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI conversation that isn't often discussed. It's the equity. And can include discussions around pay equity. So men and women doing the job should be paid the same. Pay equity. And there are pay equity laws on the books as of right now. And inclusion is the I in DEI, creating an environment where all individuals feel welcomed, valued, and empowered to contribute fairly. I've heard people say diversity is inviting everyone to the dance, and inclusion is actually asking someone to dance, inviting them to participate. But we know that there are a lot of times that we can be at the party, but not feel like a part of the party, not feel welcomed. If anyone has ever been invited to a party where they haven't felt welcomed, they can probably understand. So, one of the things that I wanted to emphasize is that DEI goes way beyond just workplace issues. A lot of the focus of DEI in the national discussion is around hiring. Some people say that it involves hiring unqualified people just because of their dimension of diversity. In particular, we've heard a lot about hiring or lowering standards to hire Black people, hiring unqualified people, and unfairly discriminating against white men who are deserving of the job in order to lower the bar for those who are undeserving. And absolutely not what DEI is. And in fact, that is illegal. So I've heard people say, I'm not a DEI hire, I was qualified for the job. Well, DEI hire, that connotation, it's terrible, but it doesn't mean unqualified. What it can mean, though, is that instead of companies rushing to hire to fill a position, that their diversity policy may say, well, slow down and make sure you have a diverse slate of candidates. It may be more difficult because of systemic barriers, because of really opaque networks. It may take more time to find a qualified woman or a qualified person of color, but let's wait until we have a diverse slate and then give everyone an equal shot at the role. And when that happens, everyone is qualified, and then the best person for the role is selected. Um, so for people to say, I've never benefited from DEI because I've always been qualified for my roles, that's actually as misinformed as is the thought people are hired, qualified people are hired for roles. It's just ridiculous. Now, beyond hiring, um, there are other examples of DEI programs, right? So training on bias to eliminate biases from hiring and helping people challenge some maybe unconscious bias are included in DEI programs. I mentioned diverse candidate slates, structured interview processes, and diverse interview panels, right? Partnering with diverse organizations to make sure that, for example, students from HBCUs are given the same access to opportunities as students from PWIs, women's leadership organizations, LGBTQ plus, and veterans networks. Again, still talking a lot about hiring. Leadership development. Now, this is internal equity programs, making sure that the access to leadership roles and the path to leadership roles are equitable. So leadership development programs for women and people of color that have historically been marginalized and not had access. Pay equity audits to make sure that an organization's pay practices are not discriminatory in practice. Typically, organizations don't intend to discriminate, but they may have the effect of discriminatory, and pay equity audits can help identify that. Employee resource groups can help with the inclusion to make sure that people feel welcomed and that they feel community with others who are similarly situated. Flexible work arrangements can be an example of equitable or inclusive work practices, like remote work, job sharing, flexible hours, to support the diverse needs of working parents and caregivers. It could fall under a DEI program. Inclusion and belonging initiatives can include cultural awareness and sensitivity training programs. Inform and educate around differences related to religion, national origin, things like that. Neurodiversity hiring and support programs. And there's a lot of talk about folks that are on the autism spectrum or other neurological differences, but still very valuable in the workplace and have lots of contributions to make. Just work differently. We've had a lot of conversations about the pronouns for LGBTQ, trans, and other individuals. Language accessibility for those who may speak other languages. Celebrating heritages, different heritages, as we are in the second day of February and celebrating Black History Month after having it banned and then reinstated. And March being Women's History Month, Pride Month, I believe is in the summer, I'm going to say June or July, Hispanic Heritage Month, and many other cultural celebrations. So those are really focused on workplace. They have corporate social responsibility and external engagement. Supplier diversity programs to give historically underrepresented businesses access to contracts with corporations, and prioritizing partnerships with minority-owned, women-owned, LGBTQ-owned, veteran-owned businesses, for example. Um, let's see. Mental health and well-being programs. Looking at my notes, because I want to make sure that I don't forget anything. So, under the larger umbrella of DEI, there are diverse patient recruitment programs in healthcare. I'll give a few examples from healthcare because that's an industry, a sector that I'm extremely familiar with. So, initiatives focused on increasing the participation of underrepresented racial and ethnic groups in clinical, developing a drug and not testing it on Black people, but selling it, and then finding out that there's an adverse effect. And I talk all the time about how we found out during the pandemic, the pentatonic, during the pandemic, that pulse oximeters worked differently on Black skin than they did on white skin. That the range, the normal range for the oximeter for that is different for Black people than for white people. So during the pandemic, they were reading normal wasn't actually normal. Black impacted us severely. So medical devices and drugs need to be tested on diverse patient populations. That is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Community-based clinical research partnerships, equitable trial selection. You're not going to have a clinical trial site in the middle of Wyoming and then say, well, we can't find any Black people to participate. Well, who's in Wyoming? Maybe if you move your clinical trial site to somewhere else, you'll find some diverse participants. I mean, not all of this is rocket science. Cultural competency training for clinical researchers. I would say for not only clinical researchers, but other medical practitioners as well. Just understanding how historical and cultural issues show up with patients and could impact their care and treatment is very important. Let's see. We talk about bias-free AI and data analytics in healthcare is another one. So ensuring that AI-driven healthcare tools do not reinforce racial, gender, or socioeconomic disparities in diagnostics and treatment recommendations. Important. It's DEI. Health disparities research grants. That's funding. Let's see. Language access and translation services. Offering multilingual clinical trial materials. Okay, I'm reading this now. Let's see. And let me give you some other issues, some other examples, okay, because there are so many examples that people don't even think of, and they're like, well, that's not DEI. It is, actually. It is. And people are so focused on qualified people when the issue is so much broader than that. So let me give you some more examples. Ramps and sidewalks. My father worked for the state of New York as an affirmative action officer, making sure that the government buildings had ramps and were accessible for people with disabilities. That's DEI. And for those who are mobility challenged, that took a long time, and it was not a insignificant fight to be able to ensure that those ramps and those curb cuts were in place so that people with mobility challenges and wheelchair bound could get around. Subtitles and captions on TVs and phones for the visually impaired is DEI. Family restrooms, changing tables in men's restrooms. Because why would a man need a changing table? They don't change babies. Only women change babies. Breastfeeding, pumping stations, and accommodations in the workplace, in other public spaces. I see now they have these kiosks in airports so that mothers who are traveling can breastfeed. Floating paid holidays. Because you know what? Maybe somebody doesn't want to take a certain holiday, Indigenous Peoples Day, for example. Something that's personally meaningful to them. That's DEI. Pay equity and transparency. We talked about parental leave because, again, perhaps there are fathers that want to be caretakers and that want to be present for their children. So it's not just actually having a job to come back to after giving birth to a child is part of DEI programming. Not having to put up with workplace harassment. DEI. Work accommodation for a variety of disabilities. DEI. Flexible work arrangements. We talked about that. Size inclusive chairs and beds in medical facilities. Can you imagine? Listen, I have more pounds on me than I need. However, I couldn't imagine being too large to be treated in a hospital. That's crazy. Belt extenders on planes. Food options for vegetarians, vegans, kosher, gluten-free, etc. at medical facilities. I don't eat pork or beef. I'm not vegetarian. I'm not vegan, but I would think I'm comforted knowing that there are multiple dietary options, and that I'm asked. I haven't before, and I'm grateful that I had the ability to be asked and not just served, pig's feet or whatever, ham. It's unthinkable now, but thanks to DEI, we have these provisions in place. Not doors. I'm a former smoker, but yeah, big deal. Being able to have medical professionals and your coworkers use your preferred name, not just for queer people. Yeah, there are other people who have preferred names. Wellness programs and incentives, more relaxed and inclusive dress code policies. There are people who have a strict religious dress codes, and having that be acknowledged in the workplace is important. Okay, so the employee, how about large print materials? My eyesight isn't the best. I love the fact that I can increase the font on my electronics because of the recognition that that's important. And, if it were printed and I needed larger print, I appreciate having that ability and the thought of that in advance because of DEI initiatives. um, multiple religious options at hospitals, accessible bikes and public transportation accommodations. The buses that have the that go down so that someone in a wheelchair can get on and lift them up, that's would not have come about without the thought of people with disabilities can travel, can be mobile. So company covered mental and behavioral health resources, EAP, all of that. Let me tell you what DEI isn't, which is a much shorter list. Well, it's a shorter list here because it's so much of what's floating around about what's out there. Hiring an unqualified person for a job just because they're a person of color. That is not DEI. Hiring based on race just to meet diversity goals. That's illegal. That is not DEI. It's not a new fad or buzzword. DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, has gone on for many, many years under various names. And in fact, it's an evolution from affirmative action. First, diversity and inclusion, then diversity, equity, inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. You might hear DEIB. All similar variations on a theme to make sure that we, in the workplace and in public spaces, in our programs, in our policies, are representing demographics of this country, that companies serve their employees, their customers, their suppliers, their vendors, their stakeholders, and that people are represented and included and in an equitable and fair way. I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments or reach out to me via one of the many avenues that I have provided to contact me. This is an important conversation. It's important that everyone understand what we're talking about, because if we don't have common language or common understanding, we're going to continue the miscommunication. And I've seen some misunderstanding in places and spaces where I would expect the awareness to be higher. So I wanted to come and talk about this. I think I'm going to try to link to another video that I did with the conversation. I'm going to ask for her permission to link to her video here. We had a conversation about a number of topics which I think are relevant. I will try to do that. But if you're watching this not live and in the future, thank you. Please like, subscribe, share, comment would be great. And having a conversation, maybe daily, just come with some thoughts. So much going on in the world. There's a lot to talk about. A lot of it affects our careers, a lot of lives, and so much of it is intertwined. And I don't think that at the pace it can wait for a lot of structure, a lot of editing. So while I may continue to write and produce and edit, and just talk. And I invite you to join me and I'll have some interviews with some experts and some thought leaders, or just some regular folks who will have a conversation. But I want to create a space where people can learn and engage and share and vent and just feel safe. So that's all for tonight. Have a great evening, and I will talk to you soon. Bye,